All right, guys, we're back for the second part of episode 51. First part, we covered all WWE and how I feel like CM Punk, if he does come back, what I think he'll do with him, how I think they should go about booking it, and what would probably be the best option for his opponent at WrestleMania 36. So let's go to MMA. We've got a lot to talk about, and I want to do something a little fun. I'm going to break down the top 15 guys at 170 pounds, and then I'm going to give you what I think their next matchup should be, who I think is going to win, and stuff like that. So that's just something fun. I figured we could do it for each weight class. So today we'll do 170 pounds, and maybe next week we'll do maybe 135 pounds, the Bantamweight division. I think that would be a fun one, especially when you hear the fight that got booked at 135 pounds for a UFC fight night in Raleigh, North Carolina. So let's get to this news first. A couple big fight announcements. We've got Ryan Spann taking on Ovince St. Preux. I believe that's in January, like January 18th maybe. No, January 18th is the pay-per-view. Maybe the beginning of January. I know that they said that fight is definitely happening at light heavyweight. Ryan Spann's undefeated in the UFC at 3-0. I think he's 17-5 overall. And then Ovince St. Preux, obviously, wins some, lose some, hot and cold, real hot and cold. He was on a streak for a while, but, he's just had a little bit of a rough go lately. Obviously, he fought John Jones back in the day at UFC. I want to say it was UFC 197. It was John Jones and OSP. It was supposed to be Jones and Cormier, their rematch, and then Cormier had to pull out because he got injured or something happened, that whole thing. But, yeah, so the fights for UFC Fight Night in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is going to be on January 25th, we've got two huge fights. First, in the co-main event, we've got a bantamweight fight between Corey Sandhagen, who's 5-0 in the UFC, 12-1 overall, going up against the former lightweight champion, former featherweight contender, and first fight at bantamweight for Frankie the Answer Edgar. This is a great fight. Such a great fight a good fight for Corey Sandhagen, because if he wins, it'll get him a big win, and a really tough matchup for a guy like Frankie Edgar. And this will really prove if he can hang with the guys at 135 pounds. His teammate Marlon Moraes fights at 135 pounds, and they train together. And I feel like that's might be a little bit of a problem, because if Frankie gets past Corey Sandhagen, then he's maybe 1 or 2 wins away from getting, that top contender shot. But, one thing I really like about this fight is let's say Frankie Edgar wins this fight, okay? And then we get Dominic Cruz coming back in the near future. I just read the rankings report that said Cruz was taken out of the bantamweight rankings. I agree with it. He hasn't fought since December 2016 when he lost the title to Cody No Love Garbrandt. And this is a tough fight for Frankie, and it's a good fight for Corey. So whoever wins this fight could get Dominic Cruz in his return. I feel like they're going to want to give Dominic Cruz one tune-up fight if he does come back, when he comes back. And then if he wins that, maybe he fights for the championship, or fight 1 or 2 fights against top contenders and then go fight for the championship. You never know, though. I mean, rankings, they don't matter as much. They should. I feel like they're starting to matter a little bit more to the UFC. So hopefully, they get back on track with this and still make the super fights and the fun fights that the fans want to see. But, pay respect to the rankings. If a guy's ranked number 1 or number 2, have number 1 fight number 2, number 3 fight number 4, number 2 fight number 3, and then the number 1 guy fights for the title. That's kind of how it's got to go. But I know, depending on star power and, sometimes people think your mouth can get you further than your actual performances. That's true for some people, but I don't know if I'd take it that far with everybody. And then in the main event of the UFC Fight Night Raleigh, North Carolina, it's a heavyweight division fight between Curtis Razor Blades and Junior Cigano Dos Santos. Dos Santos was on a little bit of a streak before he lost to Francis Ngannou. And Curtis Blades has looked amazing too. He suffered a loss to Francis Ngannou as well, and then came back and got 2 victories. This fight's really good for the heavyweight division, and it can line up your next contender or number 2 guy, number 3 guy, something like that, to where if whoever wins this fight, they're right there for a title shot. They probably need one more fight, and then they would be in the title shot, just considering we've got guys like Francis Ngannou, who's basically right there for another title shot. I feel like he'll probably get the winner of DC Stipe if they end up fighting again. If they don't fight, I could see Stipe versus Francis Ngannou number 2. But you got a guy like Alexander Volkov just coming off a win over Greg Hardy. And I think Francis Ngannou and Alexander Volkov is a great fight for the heavyweight division. If they don't want to give Francis the title shot, I feel like Volkov versus Francis would be a good co-main event, a good main event for a fight night, a good pay-per-view main card fight. It's just a good fight all the way around. I like Francis's chances in that just because, we saw what Derek Lewis did to Alexander Volkov, where he was getting pieced up like the whole fight. And then Derek Lewis just landed one good overhand right, knocked him down and put him to sleep. If Francis lands that same punch on Volkov, he's knocking him out cold. And he only needs one shot. So I would favor Francis in that fight, but I'd still want to see it. So Blades versus Dos Santos, January 25th. Main event, co-main event, Corey Sandhagen versus Frankie the Answer Edgar in the bantamweight division at 135 pounds. Corey Sandhagen, man, that dude is a wizard. He's so good on the feet. He's good on the ground. We saw more of his grappling against when he beat Rafael Assunção at UFC 241, but he constantly cuts angles, moves in and out, switches direction seamlessly, can switch stances at the blink of an eye, and transition from striking to takedowns. He's just an all-around good mixed martial artist. He's not primarily a striker. He's not primarily a grappler. He's just a good mixed martial artist. And he says that he takes a lot of his, his techniques and everything from a guy like Dominic Cruz, and that's one of the best guys you could take stuff from in that division. The king of footwork, the king of cutting angles, the king of herky-jerky movement, as people like to call it. I actually have a breakdown on Dominic Cruz. It was the first breakdown I did. I think it was Double Trouble breakdown number 1 on Dominic the Dominator Cruz a while ago. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely go out of your way and look at that up before Dominic gets another fight, because you never know who he's going to be fighting next. I would say if Corey Sandhagen beats Frankie Edgar, I think we probably get Corey Sandhagen versus maybe the winner of Aldo versus Moraes at 135 pounds. But I honestly think that Corey and Sandhagen versus Frankie Edgar could set up a fight for the returning Dominic Cruz if he does end up coming back in 2020, early 2020. I think Frankie Edgar versus Dominic Cruz is a fight fans have wanted to see forever. I know it's one of my fights I've wanted to see, even though I knew they were always in a different division. I always wanted to see Frankie Edgar and Dominic Cruz. And Corey Sandhagen, if that's his idol, you got to take your idol out to get to the title, and it would put his footwork up to the test to see if his movement and footwork would be able to shut down a guy like Dominic Cruz. I know Cruz is really injury prone, but he's one of my favorite bantamweights, probably my favorite bantamweight, one of my favorite fighters of all time, just because of how smart he is and how much he uses his footwork and his movement to evade shots, not take the damage and win fights. And, Cody Garbrandt obviously put on the performance of his life at UFC 207 to beat Dominic Cruz and claim the Bantamweight Championship. And we thought that Cody Garbrandt was going to be hanging on to the championship for, months, maybe just keep racking up wins, and then gets knocked out by Dillashaw after he drops him in the first round at UFC 217, gets the rematch at 227 and gets knocked out again. Was fighting stupid, just standing in one spot, trading. And then against Pedro Munoz at UFC 235, he's landing good shots. Looked like he was beating Pedro Munoz. Aside from the leg kicks, Pedro was definitely landing good calf kicks to the lead leg of Cody Garbrandt that was stifling his movement and really hurting him a lot, making him switch stances. But he made the mistake again of standing in one spot and trading, and he just thought his chin could hold up, and it didn't. He got dropped and finished by Pedro Munoz. And I know we've talked about Cody Garbrandt before on this podcast, and we're going to keep talking about him because this guy is so talented. He probably is the best bantamweight or one of the best bantamweights in the world. If he gets back to the style that he fought guys like Dominic Cruz, Takeya Mizugaki, all guys like that, be light on the feet, move around, stick and move, slip shots, get a little comfortable in there, but don't engage in brawls. If you get hit, just move around, take in everything and keep moving, slipping shots and stuff like that. Don't stand in one spot and trade. And I recently read that he has moved his camp out of Team Alpha Male to go train with Mark Henry It's probably one of the best moves he could have ever made in his career. To train with a guy like Mark Henry, who trains guys like Marlon Moraes, Eddie Alvarez, Frankie Edgar, Corey Anderson. He trains some of the best guys in MMA, and he's mainly focusing on footwork, movement, and boxing. And that's Cody Garbrandt's style. That's his bread and butter. So if Mark Henry can teach Cody Garbrandt to not engage in brawls and just stick, move, be light on the feet, and be technical like he fought in that Dominic Cruz fight, that dude's untouchable at 135 pounds. I'm sorry, you don't have to agree with me. I think that Marlon Moraes would give him a run for his money for sure. I definitely think Marlon could be the best bantamweight, aside from obviously Henry Cejudo won their fight at UFC 238. But I think Marlon Moraes and Cody Garbrandt are the best bantamweights in the world. I don't consider Henry Cejudo to be the best bantamweight. I know he beat the former bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw at 125 pounds. I'd like to see them get a rematch. But obviously Dillashaw is on the fence until early 2021 due to him failing that test for erythropoietin, EPO, and, failing the drug test. So that does kind of put a little bit of light on the losses that Cody Garbrandt has to Dillashaw, because was he on the drugs and on the shit when he beat Cody Garbrandt? And then those wins don't look as good as they once did. So, it's just a tough spot, and bantamweight is looking great, and I can't wait to see what's next in the 135-pound division. Obviously, UFC 245, we've got Jose Aldo moving down to 135 pounds for the first time to take on Marlon Moraes. Even though I'm really worried about Aldo in that fight just due to the weight cut. I mean, he barely made 145 pounds early on in his career. Maybe he's, got better nutrition and learned a good way to cut weight. But we saw what happened to TJ Dillashaw when he cut weight to 125 pounds and he had it all scientific and everything. He focused so much on the weight cut, and the first hard shot he got hit with, he got dropped and finished. So it's tough, but Aldo versus Moraes is a fight I want to see, but I'm worried about Aldo in that fight, and I think that Marlon's going to knock him out cold. We'll talk about that when I do my UFC 245 predictions a little later on down the line. Maybe in about 2 weeks, we'll post that up just because it's such a big card. But yeah, guys, what else do we got? So let's just say, like, if Corey Sandhagen beats Frankie, which I'm leaning towards Corey Sandhagen, I just think his footwork, his movement, and his overall, fight IQ is going to be a little bit too much for Frankie. I do like the move, however, for Frankie to 135 pounds, just because he was too small for 155 pounds. He was like the perfect size for 145 pounds, and him being at 135 pounds, I don't know if he'll have that much of a size advantage, but I feel like he might have a little bit of an advantage. But I think the speed is what's going to give Frankie trouble at 135 pounds. And I'm leaning towards Sandhagen to beat him, but I'm excited that this fight got made, and I'm glad to see what Frankie looks like at 135 pounds. I love Frankie Edgar, and I can't wait to watch this fight. Now, let's move on to the best segment of this second part of the podcast, where we're going to break down the top 15 guys in the welterweight division of the UFC at 170 pounds and say what I believe their next matchup should be and who I think is the best matchups to make based on, what information we have in fights currently going on. So first of all, let's knock out Colby and Usman, because they'll be fighting at UFC 245. Okay, so we're going to knock those guys out. We'll knock out Colby, and we'll knock out Kamaru Usman. Okay, so we got the champ and the interim champ. Even though he's not the interim champ anymore, we're going to knock those guys out. So that's your first matchup, Colby versus Usman. I'm going to give like a little short prediction. I'm picking Colby to beat Usman. So let's do Colby Covington gets the win at 205 at UFC 245. Then we had a fight that was supposed to be Mickey Gall versus Carlos Condit. And this fight got pulled because Condit had to pull out due to a knee injury, I think, or some type of injury. So Mickey Gall doesn't have an opponent. I'm probably thinking, I thought it was going to be Gilbert Burns, but Burns said he's not getting the fight and they have bigger plans for him. I'm sure Mickey Gall stays on the card. Maybe you give him a guy like, if he's ready to go, maybe give him Anthony Rocco Martin. I think that'd be a good fight for 170 pounds. You could do Mickey Gall versus Anthony Rocco Martin. And then for Carlos Condit, I've got something we're going to cover a little bit later, and I think you guys are going to like it. So let's do, and then Jorge Masvidal, we're going to give him the winner of Colby and Usman because that's what he deserves. Unless he gets a fight with Conor McGregor, I don't expect him to take another fight. So I would say that Jorge waits out and gets the winner of Colby and Usman, which I said I'm leaning towards Colby. So we'd get Jorge versus Colby. The story's there. Everything's there. It would sell pay-per-views without a doubt. So Jorge versus Colby Covington later in 2020. Now we've got Leon Edwards. He's currently ranked number 4 in the division. He could wait to get a title shot, but I don't think he's going to. I know he wants it, but I think they're going to give him another fight. I would give Leon Edwards. He already beat RDA, who's ranked number 5. You could give him a guy like Damian Maia. I don't think they're going to do that. So I'm going to say let's give Leon Edwards the fight against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Thompson's coming off a good performance against Vicente Luque about 2 weeks ago at UFC 244. So let's make Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Leon Rocky Edwards, and let's make it the co-main event to a fight that I think is going to be booked. They both agreed to it. I'm sure the UFC wants to make it, and that is going to be Darren the Gorilla Till, which is in the middleweight division. Obviously, this isn't the main, this isn't the same division, but Darren was a former welterweight. I say you do Darren Till versus Robert Whittaker at maybe the UFC London card. I think that's what they had hinted at that fight happening on, or that's where Robert wanted it to happen. I'm sure they're going to make the fight. So let's do Darren Till versus Robert Whittaker, with the co-main event being Leon Rocky Edwards and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. That fight would be amazing. It would be a straight-up striking chess match, and you can't count out Leon Rocky Edwards because you've seen what he did to guys like Rafael Dos Anjos and I can't think. Why can I not think of this? Who did he beat? RDA. He beat RDA, and then Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Yeah, and he looked great in both those fights. So I say let's do Leon Rocky Edwards, who's ranked number 4, versus the number 8 ranked Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and then you make that the co-main event to Darren the Gorilla Till and Robert Whittaker in the middleweight division. Now we've got Woodley left. This is tough, man, because I like the fight between Leon and Wonderboy, but I also like a fight between Tyron Woodley and Leon Edwards. I think that Edwards would be more likely to take the fight against Woodley than he would be against Thompson, just based on rankings alone. Oof, man, this is tough. And Woodley's ranked number 1. So, you know what? We're going to change it. Let's go with, I know, guys, I'm terrible, but let's go with Leon Edwards versus Tyron Woodley. Scratch the Wonderboy and Edwards fight. I think that Edwards probably is more than likely not going to take that, just based on where Stephen Thompson is ranked. I think he wants either title or number 1 contender fight. So we're going to actually switch it, and we're going to do Tyron Woodley versus Leon Rocky Edwards at the 170-pound division, and we'll keep Stephen Thompson for another fight. Let's do what do we got for Rafael Dos Anjos? Obviously, he beat Kevin Lee when Kevin Lee tried to move up to 170 pounds. He's one of the best guys in the world, currently ranked number 5 in the division. Who would I give RDA? He already beat Robbie Lawler. He beat Kevin Lee when he tried to move up. I think you could give... Oof, this is tough, man, because I feel like Woodley, RDA, Thompson, and Edwards are like all right there. Either of these guys could match up and you get a good fight any way it goes. And I really like the RDA versus Woodley fight, but I kind of favor Woodley a little bit. I think he's just too much for RDA. And I think that the Wonderboy versus think Wonderboy versus Edwards would be good, but I think Edwards has to get Woodley because you got to do whoever wins that can get a title shot after Masvidal faces the winner of Colby and Usman. So let's see. Who do we give to RDA? Let's look at the top 10. Top 10 or top 15, we've got Woodley, Covington, Usman, Masvidal, Edwards, RDA, Damian Maia, Santiago Ponzinibbio, Stephen Thompson, Nate Diaz, Anthony Pettis, Robbie Lawler, Askren, Vicente Luque, Gilbert Burns, Jeff Neal. Tough fights to make. RDA. Yeah, so like I said, let's go Rafael Dos Anjos versus... this is tough. Let's do RDA versus Pettis at 170 pounds. I like the fight. I think that Pettis would be willing to take it, and I think RDA would probably be willing to take it just because he knows how the fight went when they fought at 155 pounds. So let's do Rafael Dos Anjos, who's ranked number 5, versus the number 10 ranked Anthony Showtime Pettis. They're both coming off a loss. The fight just makes sense, and being at 170 pounds, it'd probably be interesting. It could main event or co-main event a fight night, be on the main card. It doesn't matter. So we've covered RDA, we've covered Anthony Pettis, we've covered Colby, Tyron, Jorge, Leon Edwards, RDA. Let's see, who do we got next? Let's go. Okay, so Damian Maia is ranked number 6 in the welterweight division. Obviously coming off the win over Ben Askren. Tough fight to pick because I feel like he's in a tough spot. He's ranked 6. He's coming off a lot of wins, but it's a tough matchup either way, depending on who you give him. I say, you know what? Let's get a little crazy. Let's do Damian Maia versus Vicente Luque. Tough fight for both guys, and, you know, it's a striking matchup for Damian Maia. He just got grappler versus grappler and won. So let's do number 6 ranked Damian Maia versus the number 13 ranked Vicente Luque. I think that's a good matchup for him. You could give him a guy like Robbie Lawler or somebody a little bit higher ranked, but I think the Damian Maia Vicente Luque fight is definitely a good fight to make. Okay, let's go. Even Da Vinci. We've got Santiago Ponzinibbio. Now, I thought he was fighting Robbie Lawler at 245. I know it had been in the talks for a little bit, but he's obviously that's not happening. So let's give RDA. No. Let's give Woodley. Oof, man. Guys, this is so tough to call. Let's do Wonderboy versus Ponzinibbio. I just think that, I like the Woodley or the Thompson and Edwards fight, but I feel like Edwards is not going to be eager to take that. I think it'd be a dream fight for the fans. I think just striking alone. But let's do Ponzinibbio versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. It's still kind of a striking matchup. You never know what's going to happen with a guy like Wonderboy. You know, he's obviously coming off a good win, but, you know, who knows? Now we've got 9 ranked Nate Diaz. We've got number 11 ranked Robbie Lawler. We've got Ben Askren, Gilbert Burns, Jeff Neal, and Mike Perry. Neal and Perry are fighting at UFC 245. So let's say I'm going to give the advantage to Jeff Neal in that fight. So let's say Neal beats Perry. Let's do Jeff Neal versus Gilbert Burns. Neal versus Burns at 170 pounds. Or the winner, whoever wins Mike Perry versus Jeff Neal, you give him to Gilbert Burns. That way you're getting Burns back into the swing of things. I know he said he's got a fight lined up, but that's what I would do, is do Jeff Neal versus Gilbert Burns. That's the 14th and the 15th ranked guy. If Mike Perry wins, you could do Mike Perry versus Gilbert Burns. who knows? For Ben Askren, I know he's talking about retirement. We're going to still give him a fight. I feel like he'll probably take one more. So let's give Ben Askren. You know what? Screw it. Let's do Ben Askren versus Robbie Lawler 2. I was going to say do Robbie Lawler versus Carlos Condit. You know what? Forget about it. God, I don't know. We're going to take Nate Diaz out of the rankings because, I don't know where he fits in. I don't know if he's going to come back, and he'll probably only come back for big fights. So I'd say let's do let's just do Ben Askren, Robbie Lawler number 2. I like the Condit. If Condit waits it out, I think he can get the fight against Robbie Lawler, and I think Carlos Condit versus Robbie Lawler 2 would be a good fight. If not, who knows? But if Mickey Gall ends up fighting another guy, who knows who he's going to be fighting. But let's just break down what I got so far. I think we covered everybody. Like I said, I took Nate Diaz out. We covered Robbie. We covered Askren. Covered Ponzinibbio, Maia. We covered basically the whole top 15. So what I got is Colby versus Usman. The winner, which I'm picking to be Colby Covington, will fight Jorge Gamebred Masvidal next. Then, with Mickey Gall and Carlos Condit being off the table, let's do Carlos Condit versus Robbie Lawler 2. It gets Robbie another fight. It's a good fight for the fans. Whatever. Let's do Leon Rocky Edwards versus Tyron Woodley later on, early next year, 2020. Let's do Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Santiago Ponzinibbio when he comes back. Let's do Rafael Dos Anjos versus Anthony Pettis 2 at welterweight. And then let's do Santiago, like I said, Ponzinibbio and Wonderboy. Let's do Damian Maia versus Vicente Luque. Gives him another good fight. Could move his way right up back in the rankings. Even though he lost to Wonderboy, he looked decent in the fight. And then let's do Jeff Neal versus Mike Perry. Whoever wins that fights Gilbert Burns. And then if Lawler and Condit don't end up fighting, you could give Ben Askren another fight with Robbie Lawler, which I'm sure he wouldn't want to take, but you got to do what you got to do. And I think that could be a fight. If they don't give Robbie Lawler to Ben Askren, have Ben Askren fight the winner of Jeff Neal and Mike Perry. Or Gilbert Burns. You can mix them either way you want. But yeah, guys, that's what I got. I hope you guys enjoyed breaking down who I think should fight each other at 170 pounds. I think it's a good idea, and I really like doing these things. I never really thought about doing the rankings in the top 15 and breaking it down on the podcast and figuring out who I think should fight who. But this is a fun thing for me to do, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. So yeah, if you guys have any suggestions of fights you'd like to see, send me messages on Instagram, Twitter. Just search Touch 'em Up Podcast. Go on YouTube, search Touch 'em Up Pod. I've got a few breakdowns up there that were previously recorded, but if you can't find it on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and stuff like that, a few of them are moving over to YouTube. And also, guys, like I said, I'm on Anchor, I'm on Spotify, I'm on Apple Podcast, I'm on Google Podcast, I'm on Overcast, I'm on Stitcher, I'm on everything. Anywhere you could get your audio podcast, definitely go and check it out. It's Touch 'em Up, TOUCH_EMUP, and find it. And have a lot of fun. If you like the podcast and you keep tuning in, send it to everybody on your Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, your friends, best friends, coworkers, girlfriends, boyfriends, mom, dad, anybody you got. If you know an MMA fighter, send it to them. If you know some guys in the UFC, Bellator, even just amateur fighters who you think would enjoy this podcast or other fans of MMA, definitely go out of your way to send this to them. And also, I do have a link set up if you'd like to donate or become a monthly subscriber. Again, like I said, it's not needed. Just listen. Just you listening and tuning in is enough. And thank you for everybody who's listening. But if you'd like to donate, the link is there. I think you could subscribe for either $4.99 or $9.99. It's something like that. It's a monthly subscriber. And yeah, guys, that's going to be it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll be back on Friday. Or back on Monday, I'm sorry. Today is Friday. Back on Monday with a new episode. I'm Double M. This has been the Touch 'em Up Podcast, episode 51, part 2, and I'm out. Have a good night, everybody, all right?